Joseph Stalin and the Soviet Gulag System Introduction. Joseph Stalin, who ruled the Soviet Union from the mid-1920s until his death in 1953, presided over one of the most brutal regimes of the 20th century. Among his most infamous legacies was the creation and expansion of the Gulag, a vast network of forced labor camps that became synonymous with political repression, suffering, and state terror. The Gulag system served as both a mechanism of punishment for perceived enemies of the state and an economic engine for Stalin's ambitious industrialization projects. Understanding Stalin's role in the Gulag illuminates the broader dynamics of authoritarian control, ideology, and human rights abuses in the Soviet Union. Origins of the Gulag system. The term Gulag is derived from the Russian acronym Glavnoye Upravlenie Lagerai, Main Camp Administration, which managed the forced labor camps under the NKVD, the Soviet secret police. Although the foundations of the system were laid during Vladimir Lenin's leadership after the 1917 revolution, Stalin transformed it into a central instrument of state policy. Beginning in the early 1930s, the Gulag system expanded dramatically as Stalin consolidated power and sought to eliminate real and imagined threats to his rule. The rapid industrialization campaigns of the first five-year plan, 1928 to 1932, required massive amounts of cheap labor, particularly in remote regions such as Siberia. Prisoners were forced to build canals, railways, mines, and logging operations under harsh and often deadly conditions. The Gulag thus became an integral part of the Soviet economy, as well as a tool of political repression. Political repression and the Great Terror. Stalin's paranoia and obsession with control fueled the mass arrests that filled the gulags. The infamous Great Purge, 1936 to 1938, marked the height of political terror in the USSR. During this period, millions were accused of counter-revolutionary activities or labeled enemies of the people. Many were executed outright. Others were sentenced to long terms in labor camps. These accusations often lacked any basis in fact, resulting from forced confessions, denunciations, or arbitrary quotas set by the state. The Gulag system functioned as a key component of Stalin's repressive apparatus. Prisoners included political dissidents, intellectuals, religious figures, and ordinary citizens caught up in the sweeping purges. Ethnic minorities such as Ukrainians, Poles, and Tatars were also disproportionately targeted. The goal was not merely punishment, but the complete subjugation of society through fear. Life and death in the Gulags. Conditions within the Gulags were brutal. Prisoners endured starvation, inadequate shelter, extreme climates, and relentless labor. Mortality rates were staggering, particularly during the early years of construction projects such as the White Sea-Baltic Canal and the Kolyma gold mines. Disease, exhaustion, and violence were widespread. Guards exercised near total control, often resorting to arbitrary beatings or executions. Despite these horrors, the gulags were not merely sites of death. They also revealed the resilience of the human spirit. Prisoners found ways to resist through cultural expression, clandestine education, and the preservation of dignity. Memoirs from survivors like Alexander Solzhenitsyn, The Gulag Archipelago, and Varlam Shalamov, The Kolyma Tiles, later exposed the full extent of Stalin's crimes to the world. Economic and ideological purposes. While political repression was the Gulag's primary function, Stalin also justified the camps in economic terms. Forced labor was used to extract natural resources, construct infrastructure, and populate remote areas. The Soviet state portrayed the Gulag as a means of re-education through labor, claiming that hard work could reform criminals and enemies of socialism. In reality, the camps were inefficient and wasteful, relying on human suffering to sustain projects that often failed to meet production goals. The Gulag system reflected Stalin's broader ideology of total control and the subordination of the individual to the state. It embodied the fusion of political terror and economic exploitation that characterized Stalinist rule. The decline and legacy of the Gulags. Following Stalin's death in 1953, the Soviet leadership, under Nikita Khrushchev, began to dismantle the Gulag system. Khrushchev's secret speech of 1956 denounced Stalin's cult of personality and many of his repressive policies. Hundreds of thousands of prisoners were released and rehabilitated, though the scars of the Gulag remain deep. The legacy of Stalin's gulags extends beyond the Soviet period. They stand as a stark warning of how totalitarian systems can dehumanize and destroy individuals in pursuit of ideological and political ends. Modern scholarship continues to uncover the vast scale of the Gulag system and its enduring impact on Russian society, memory, and politics. Joseph Stalin's rule over the Soviet Union was marked by unprecedented levels of state violence and repression, epitomized by the Gulag labor camps. Far from being a peripheral institution, the Gulag was central to Stalin's system of governance, serving both as an instrument of terror and a pillar of the Soviet command economy. The suffering of millions within this network of camps represents one of the darkest chapters in human history. Studying Stalin and the Gulags is not merely an exercise in historical understanding, but a moral imperative, a reminder of the dangers posed by unchecked power, ideology, and the erosion of human rights.